See these little guys? These are your typical Ontario bumblebees. Believe it or not, these special insects are declining, meaning that something is causing there to be less and less bumblebees in Ontario. Many people are familiar with the decrease in honeybees happening around the world, but you see, honeybees are very different from bumblebees. Honeybees use nectar from flowers to make honey in their honey stomachs, which they then take to their beehive. Whereas bumblebees, they have very long tongues that let them drink up nectar from the low part of the flower. They even leave a scent on the flower to let other bumblebees know that the nectar is gone.
And get this, honeybees aren't even from Canada originally. They are actually from Europe, and people have just been bringing them over so that we can have honey. Bumblebees, on the other hand, are actually native to Canada, meaning that they didn't need our help to get here. Unlike the honeybees, they have been here all along. Because bumblebees are so used to Canada, they have a lot of experience with the specific types of plants that grow here and how cold it gets in the winter. This is one reason why bumblebees are so special. Unlike honeybees, they are much better at dealing with our very cold winters. They find little hiding spots in the soil, and then they sleep there all winter. This is an example of hibernation. Hibernation occurs in many other animals during the winter months when food is hard to find. Frogs, mice, and even some types of bears are all examples of animals that go into hibernation. Bumblebees are also very talented because, unlike honeybees, they are also capable of flying in the rain, which you can imagine is very difficult with those tiny little wings.
The main reason why bumblebees are so important is because they are extremely good pollinators. A pollinator is an animal that transfers pollen from plant to plant so that plants can make seeds to make more plants. When flowers are not pollinated, they don't make any seeds, which also means that fruit-producing plants won't make any fruit. No apples, no cherries, and no tomatoes. And the same goes for vegetables that we eat with seeds in them. Without pollination, there would be no cucumbers, no peppers, and no pumpkins. Bumblebees are especially great pollinators in Canada because they have been pollinating our plants for centuries, unlike honeybees. To do this, they use a special pollination technique called buzz pollination. Buzz pollination is when a bumblebee lands on a flower and vibrates its flight muscles, which causes their wings to vibrate too. This shakes the pollen loose and into the air, where the wind will carry it to another plant so that it becomes pollinated. Bumblebees are such fantastic pollinators that they are able to pollinate entire crop fields. When bees get their nectar from the flower, the pollen sticks on the bumblebee and it can carry it around to other flowers so that then they can make seeds. Bumblebees and flowers are like partners that help each other out, and the seeds that bumblebees help make turn into fruit and vegetables that we eat. They are so important for the survival of plants and foods that we eat. But somehow, every year, there are less and less of them.
One reason that bumblebees are having a hard time is because farming is destroying their habitats. Even though bumblebees help us get the food that we eat, we are taking away the food that they eat. You see, many farms grow only one type of plant, or crop as we will call it, in one very large area. This one crop will only grow during a certain time of the year. This means that all of these plants flower at once, and the bumblebees can only get the nectar from this field in a very short time. Bumblebees can only store their food for a few days, so unlike honeybees, they can't save up the nectar for later, which means they won't have any food when these plants are done flowering. This means that farmers should plant fields with all sorts of crops that flower at different times so that the bumblebees can have food all year round.
Look at all of these flowers! Sometimes people like to spray pesticides on their plants, just like these ones, to keep the bad insects away, the ones that can hurt your plants, like caterpillars and aphids. But these sprays also hurt the bumblebees by making them sick. And if the bumblebees are sick, that means that they aren't able to pollinate the plants. Bumblebees need a lot of plants to get the amount of nectar they need for food. But humans are taking away more and more plants every day. When we build roads, houses, and cities, we destroy plants and their flowers, meaning that bees need to look somewhere else for their food. Bumblebees are having a hard time finding nectar. They aren't getting enough, and it will be harder and harder for them to survive. If the bumblebees are gone, very soon many plants that are pollinated by bees will be in trouble, and then a lot of the food that you and I eat will also be gone.
Have you ever noticed this weird stuff your parents put in the garden by your house? Well, these small chips of wood and dirt make up a material called mulch. People like to use mulch because it keeps the soil moist and full of nutrients, which is good for plants. But as great as mulch is, it also has downsides for bees that many people don't know about. Some bees are what we like to call ground nesting. A nest is a word we use to describe a bee's home, just like a bird's nest. And bees' nests look a lot different from the type that birds make. And you might be thinking, don't bees live in honey hives where they deposit their honey? That's true for honeybees, but many types of bees in Canada, like the American bumblebee, are different, and they prefer to burrow deep down into the soil, almost like ants or groundhogs. They dig down and make these little tunnels that they call home. And this is why mulch is so bad for them. The bees need to be able to get to the soil to dig their tunnels, but with a thick layer of mulch on top, they aren't able to reach the soil to start digging, and it makes it almost impossible to find their old tunnels because they've been covered. American bumblebees can be found in a few areas in Ontario, like Guelph, but unfortunately their populations are becoming smaller and smaller. This might be one of the reasons why the American bumblebee is in trouble. These bees can't find food, and the places where they live are being destroyed.
There's also a huge problem happening right now called climate change, which is also giving bumblebees some trouble, especially in areas of North America where the climate is getting warmer. Bees should be following the warmth and moving into the newer, warmer areas, but for some reason they aren't. I guess you could say that bees are just too stubborn to move. The truth is, bees should be moving with their habitat because there are plenty more plants for them to pollinate, which means more food. But because bees aren't moving, that means we have to try even harder to help them out. Food is a very, very big problem for bees today. They usually get their food from nectar and flowers, but because of humans, because of us, we are making it hard for them to find food. Clearly, bees are facing a lot of problems, and all of these problems happening at once are having very negative effects. The bees need help, and there's a lot we can do to help them.
Humans are the main reason why all the bees are in trouble, so it's up to us to fix it. There are lots of things that people are already doing to help, but there are ways that you can help too. First off, these bees need new homes. Many people have already started making bee hotels or bee condos out of natural materials like bamboo, reeds, and wood. And even though some of these are very complicated and hard to make, there are simpler ones that you can make at home too, and they are just as good. With the help from an adult, you can hollow out bundles of reed or bamboo, or drill holes in pieces of wood and construct your very own bee hotel. These are really useful for bees because you are giving them a home in a place that won't be disturbed by people. If this seems a bit intimidating, don't worry. If you're looking for an even easier way to make a difference, you should consider making your garden at home a bit more bee-friendly. Bumblebee-friendly gardening means planting a wide variety of flowers that bloom at different times during the year, such as daffodils that bloom in the spring and sunflowers in the fall. This means that these animals will have nectar available year-round. Not only should your garden plants be filled with flowers that bloom at different seasons, but it's also helpful to make sure that they are native plants. Native plants are plants that can be found in the wild near your home. Bumblebees recognize these plants, and Canadian flowers are better for Canadian bumblebees. Some great plants to consider are wild strawberries and black-eyed Susans. These plants bloom at different times of the year, which means that they can provide food for the bees all year round. Remember that mulch problem we talked about? You can help spread the word about how mulch should not be used in gardens. Using a good organic fertilizer can provide the exact same nutrients, and it won't harm the bees. When people come together, we have the power to make a real difference. This is why petitions are so incredibly important, because they show people of higher power how much people care about something. If enough people can show that they care, sometimes change can happen. Petitions can usually be found on the internet so that they can reach as many people as possible. You can sign them if you support their issue. Petitions for helping bumblebees range from trying to end the use of pesticides by farmers to reducing the monocultures of crops.
One species of bumblebee that is in trouble is the rusty-patched bumblebee. Rusty-patched bumblebees were the 4th most common species in Canada in the 1970s. These bees were also very popular in Toronto in the 1980s. Unfortunately, these bees are now the first nationally listed endangered bee species in Canada. Rusty-patched bumblebee populations have become 99% smaller over the past 30 years. These bees are in trouble. The only population that still exists in Canada is in the Pinery Provincial Park in Ontario. Sometimes, when a species is in trouble, it seems like one person can't make a difference. But trust us, if you take the time and put in the effort, you can and you will have an impact. From small things like telling family and friends about the problem, to signing petitions, to making your garden at home more bee-friendly, are just as important as the bigger things. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. And now it's time to start moving and take action.